Wednesday afternoon. It's 4 p.m. in Central Europe, and it's time for our Space Café 33 Minutes with Michael Byers about the International Open Letter Reducing Risks from Uncontrolled Reentries of Rocket Bodies and Other Space Objects. And welcome to all of you to our first Space Café in 2023. So Happy New Year to all of you. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback, and we will learn and improve based on your feedback as we have done it over the years. So usually I would stay here, or I would stand here, but my moving desk is broken, so I have to sit here and do the normal spiel. However, so I'm Torsten, I'm the publisher of SpaceWatch.Global, and SpaceWatch is a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I would like to thank all of our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keep our independent journalism alive over the last years and hopefully also this year. We really appreciate that. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcasts. And the latest one features Jim Green of NASA. This morning, we had a new release of Joel Spark from Spire. Really cool to listen to. And we also new exciting episodes of the Space Café Radios, the short form podcast, as you know, from my road trip to Scotland with Hina Khan and Kevin Scullion. You really will enjoy some hard Scottish accent there. For me, it was hard to understand, but we made the best out of it. And some outstanding German radios in German language, which were much more easier for me to understand, of course, from the Eli Air Show, Worth Your Time. Our fan shop is also open for you to become a real space watcher. And yeah, that would be a great and a nice way to support us. And if you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our webpage in the event section, and you can also find us then on YouTube. So I'm totally excited to start with him into this new year. Thank you very much for getting up that early again. And with that, a very warm welcome to Dr. Michael Byers in Vancouver. I assume you are in Vancouver today.
I'm actually on Salt Spring Island, which is roughly 40 kilometers from Vancouver, and it is 7 a.m. Pacific, so good morning to everyone. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. So we had Michael in a few shows over the last years at the Space Café Canada with Jessica West and on Moriba's Vox Populi. So, and many things happen in the meantime. And for all of you that does not know Michael and did not hear about him, he holds the Canada Research Chair in Global Politics and International Law at the University of British Columbia, and he co-directs the Outer Space Institute, a global network of space experts united by their commitment to trans-disciplinary research that addresses grand challenges in the use and exploration of space. And along with Aaron Boley, Professor Byers is the co-author of the Who Owns Outer Space? International Law, Astronomy, and the Sustainable Development of Space. This book will be published, hopefully open access, by Cambridge University Press in February, so next month. And I hope it's in the final making, Michael. So once more, welcome, Michael, to our show.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So let's talk about this open letter. But before we do that, last time we spoke about the open letter for banning the kinetic ASAT tests. And now the US, Germany, Japan, and a few other countries adopted this test ban, and also the UN General Assembly put it as a resolution in praise. Is that so far correctly framed? And if so, how proud are you of your work?
Well, Torsten, I am a social scientist, and the first thing that we learn in the social sciences is that correlation does not equal a causation. So I suspect that there were hundreds, thousands of factors that contributed to the developments we've seen at the United Nations and elsewhere with regards to the banning of tests of kinetic anti-satellite weapons. Obviously, we're very pleased. We encourage everyone to weigh in on this matter, because a kinetic anti-satellite weapon test is a completely unnecessary contribution to the space debris crisis, and is therefore contrary to everything that all of us value with regards to the sustainable development of space.
I mean, as you caused this, I would say, initiative, I mean, that really had an impact. And it also potentially goes back to you, because, I mean, you are the reference for that, are you?
No, I would actually say that there are people working for governments. I give great credit to Aidan Little and his team at the British Foreign Office with regards to the move to get a resolution through the United Nations General Assembly. I also want to give credit to some of the people working at NASA and in the US State Department who have taken this on. And in particular, something they did that we did not anticipate, which was they had Vice President Kamala Harris make what is called in international law a unilateral declaration. She committed the United States to never test a ground-based kinetic anti-satellite weapon in a way that would create long-lasting debris, and made it very clear that that commitment was intended to be, you know, a legally binding commitment on the United States. And international lawyers know that you can in fact have legally binding unilateral declarations. We saw this, for instance, in the nuclear test cases back in the 1970s before the International Court of Justice. And the United States, by unilaterally committing itself, has caused other states to follow suit. Countries like Germany, like Canada, like Japan, like the United Kingdom, and we have this wave of unilateral commitments on this matter. It's really quite brilliant because it's saying to the world that we take the space debris crisis so very seriously that we're prepared to tie our own hands without a promise of reciprocity. Without other states necessarily having to sign on to the deal. We want to encourage them to come on board, but we're not waiting for them. And so a shout out to the international lawyers at NASA and the State Department. I don't want to connect names to this strategy, but it was brilliant and a real contribution to the sustainable development of space.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and we all know we can't just check market and move on, because there's still a lot to do also on that matter. But let's move on to the subject we want to talk here today about, and that's on the 19th of December. So we still can say a few days back, the Outer Space Institute published and that's a very long title. I mean, the International Open Letter on Reducing Risk from the Uncontrolled Reentries of Rocket Bodies. We also published it on SpaceWatch.Global, and we got a few thousand views on that. So, Michael, can you tell us a bit more about this initiative and what prompted you to start it?
Well, I should say from the start that the really hard work on uncontrolled reentries that's being done at the Outer Space Institute is being done by a PhD student named Ewan Wright, who has a background in aerospace engineering and is now in the interdisciplinary studies graduate program at UBC. And he's the third signatory on this letter after his two supervisors, his two professors, Aaron Boley and me. And I just want to highlight his contribution, because what we've established through our research is that there is an entirely preventable casualty risk that in the next decade, there's at least a 10% chance that someone on Earth will die as a result of a piece of re-entering rocket body, and that we have the technology and we have the mission designs to completely eliminate that risk, and countries and companies are choosing not to do so. Now, some people will say that a 10% chance of one person on a planet that has billions and billions of people is not worth taking, seriously, not worth doing anything about. But again, it's completely preventable. And if we had a risk like this in the aviation industry, we would take the necessary measures. For some reason, we've come to believe that space is so big, the oceans are so big, and space activity is so small that we don't need to worry about these risks. But I will remind people that space activity is increasing at an almost exponential rate. And what is a 10% chance right now might in 100 years be much, much larger than this. And the time to deal with the problem is now, when we only have a couple of dozen actors, we only have a couple dozen companies that are actually engaged in space launches and a dozen countries that are engaged in space launches. Unlike climate change, which involves literally billions of peoples and companies and all kinds of emitters contributing to the problem. In this case, we have just a few dozen. This is a solvable problem, and we should deal with it now.
I think as we speak, we have in Cape Canaveral or another or Falcon 9 launching. I'm not sure if it's up or not right now. We have the Transporter 6, but I mean, I read this letter and I'm also happily signed it. But you're referring to the 2021 numbers, because at that point of time where you wrote it, it was the most current one. And in numbers, we could count 135 launches. I mean, depending on the source, it's one more, one less, something like that. But so, and that's 55 or China, it's 51 US, it's 25 Russia, 6 Europe, just on the comparison. And last year, 2022, we had 30 more or 50 more to 186. So 87 US, China 64, also big increase. Russia slowed down to 22, and Europe, we don't want to talk about Europe when it comes to launches. So if you say half of them, it's about 70 rocket bodies. I mean, Falcon 9s count also for most of the, or half of those, and the others then will fall down. So what is the problem? Just the 70 that are coming back uncontrolled? So help me with that. So,
yeah, well, let's talk about SpaceX to start. SpaceX is the best actor here. Obviously, they're the largest launcher, but they have first stages that are usually brought back in a controlled manner, and not only brought back in a controlled manner, but landed on legs and then reused. So good for them on this. With regards to the second stages, they usually manage to engage in a controlled reentry and deposit the second stages in a remote area of ocean. That's good, but it's important that I said usually, because sometimes they don't. So when SpaceX is launching a satellite into a geosynchronous transfer orbit, it will sometimes exhaust all of the fuel on board the second stage in order to lift the customer satellite as high as possible, so as to reduce the amount of time and the amount of thruster fuel that the customer has to do to actually transition that satellite into geosynchronous orbit. And as a result of exhausting all of the fuel, the second stage is abandoned in a geo-transfer orbit, which has a relatively low perigee, which therefore encounters gas drag and will come back to Earth at some point in the next year or 10 years. And so even SpaceX, which has the capability to do controlled reentries all of the time, is sometimes choosing not to do so for economic reasons. And they're the best actor here. There are other actors like the Chinese with regards to their Long March 5B rockets, who are abandoning these massive core stages, 20 tons of metal in low Earth orbit. And these stages come back in an uncontrolled manner a week later, a couple of weeks later, and we've seen the consequences of that. Now, when we're talking about risk, yes, the risk on a statistical basis is still relatively low. But imagine if a piece from one of these Long March 5B stages were to impact central Manhattan. Just think of the devastation that could be caused. Even a tiny piece of space debris from a re-entered rocket body, even 300 grams, if it struck a Boeing 777 or an Airbus 350, would probably kill everyone on board. These are what are called low probability, high consequence events. And our point is simply that it's entirely preventable, that we can foresee these kinds of accidents happening in the future, and we have the technology and the mission designs now to stop this problem from growing and thereby reduce it over time. And therefore, we should go ahead and solve the problem.
So help me with the logic behind it. How can I control this? You say SpaceX as the best actor has the technology. I mean, for the first stages, we see that. I mean, or at least are on the screens. Many of us have seen it. But how can I control? I mean, you refer to the Long March or rocket body, which fell then, I think, onto Ivory Coast or one time, and then the rest in the ocean. So how can I manage that? So what is the solution? I mean, I'm too curious. I want to start with a solution here. So what can we do?
Well, you first of all make sure that your rockets have reignitable engines that can be restarted in space, so that you can use those engines to direct, to thrust the stage into a re-entry trajectory, which is what SpaceX is doing most of the time. Now, China obviously has brilliant aerospace engineers and could have designed the Long March 5B to do controlled reentries, and for some reason chose not to do so. So we'd like to see them fix the problem. This is not a question of lacking the capability, lacking the technology. Now, industry and some governments will hesitate here because they want to save costs, and they will look at the statistically small risk and the possibility of having to pay compensation as a cost of doing business, that it's simply cheaper to continue with current practices and not to change. And Aaron Boley and Ewan Wright and I point to what happened with regards to the issue of single-hulled oil tankers. So during the 1970s, the 1980s, civil society, environmental groups were pushing really hard for an international agreement to mandate double-hulled tankers, to require that every oil tanker on the ocean have two hulls, two layers to its hull, so as to dramatically reduce the risks of an oil spill. And the global shipping industry pushed back, and no progress was being made. And then the Exxon Valdez oil tanker broke onto the rocks off of the coast of southern Alaska, causing a massive oil spill, causing an amazing amount of public opinion demanding that something be done. And within a year, the United States had mandated a transition to double-hulled tankers with regards to all oil tankers entering US ports. And within 3 years, the International Maritime Organization had mandated a transition to double-hulled tankers. So all the world's oil tankers today are double-hulled tankers. We have less oil spills. The only problem here, and I would point out that this was with regards to a transportation issue in an area beyond national jurisdiction, similar to space. The only issue, as far as Aaron and Ewan and myself see here, is whether we're going to wait for that massive accident to occur before we force the industry to change, or whether we're going to have a transition that's economically sustainable, that allows a level playing field, that's done wisely and in a reasoned manner now, before an accident occurs, and therefore hopefully prevents any such accident. But look, if an international airliner is struck by a piece of rocket body and 400 people die, we will have the negotiation of a controlled reentry regime. So let's get ahead of that problem now. And let me also mention that the problem might be statistically very small now, when we are only talking about a couple hundred launches each year. But what if in 10 or 50 or 100 years, we're talking about 10,000 launches a year? Are we prepared to accept the risk associated with that level of space activity when we could solve the problem now?
Okay. Your letter is addressed to the major 6-8 agencies. And when I had a first look, I misinterpreted and said they were all signatures, but no, you're addressing this letter to them, obviously. And then the second thought was, what the heck? I mean, if ESA, if NASA, if CSA is not moving ahead on for a good course, I mean, who do we wait for? So what is their response to that? I mean, you're not started with the letter. I'm quite sure you had bilaterals in your research. Your team made these conversations already. So why are they hesitant?
Well, I'm not saying they are hesitant. The main purpose of the International Open Letter is to educate people around the world, including the space community, to say that, look, we have a problem here. It's a small problem right now, but we have the technology, we have the mission designs, we care about the sustainable development of space. Let's start working on this. So we're just raising the issue here. In terms of the addressees of the letter, the agencies, the heads of space agencies that we addressed the letter to, we had to address the letter to someone. But we asked them to work with their foreign ministries, to work with the larger government apparatus to deal with this issue. Obviously, in some cases, that will be a regulator like the Federal Aviation Authority in the United States. In other countries, it will be a different kind of agency or department. The letter is basically to all of those entities, all of those governments. And the thing that we also call for is not just the initiation of negotiations on a multilateral agreement, but we'd like to borrow an idea from the US government that they used with regards to kinetic anti-satellite weapon tests, and see individual countries unilaterally commit to adopting controlled reentry regimes. We'd like to see the FAA, for instance, require that all launches that are licensed by the United States after some transition phase be fully controlled reentries. And that would send an important signal to the rest of the world. We don't need to wait for the successful conclusion of multilateral negotiations to make a start here. And again, the principal purpose of the letter is to initiate conversations like the one that we're having today. We want the space community and the diplomatic community to realize that this is what is called low-hanging fruit, that this is an easy problem to solve, and it's going to get worse unless we do something now.
What are the obstacles you're facing? I mean, for me, it sounds that we're almost there. You are almost there with this initiative again, so that agencies, governments are about to sign it or to take this initiative to an executable level. So, but what is the response of the lawyers? I mean, we have a few of our space law community friends in the room as well. So, what is their response? Is it doable? Is it really that low-hanging fruit that you just described? I mean, that sounds too easy for me.
Yeah, well, sometimes really easy things are ignored because we haven't focused on them. And I happen to think this is relatively easy. Is it difficult? Of course it's difficult. But relative to other global challenges, this is relatively easy. And the letter obviously was reduced just before was made public and sent to the different space agencies just before Christmas. We haven't had time for a lengthy engagement with them in response. But we know that people are taking this seriously. If you look at the list, and look, we didn't have to try that hard to accumulate a couple hundred signatories, including former foreign ministers of several countries, including former heads of space agencies. When people engage with the problem and they read the science that Aaron Boley and you and Wright and I have done, and others, there are others working on this issue in the academic community, they go, hey, yeah, this makes sense. We should deal with this. Is it the biggest issue with regards to space safety and space sustainability? No, it isn't. There are far bigger challenges. But it's part of one of those really big challenges, which is the crisis of space debris. And we should just stop adding to that problem. And people talk about active debris removal, for instance. Well, wouldn't it be just as desirable to stop adding to the problem by abandoning rocket stages in orbit?
And most agencies, the big agencies at least, go out for the, our ESA calls it the net zero initiative, that they want to be neutral in adding objects to space and removing some. That all follows the same track in my opinion. So what are the obstacles? I'm asking that again. So
yeah. Well, the obstacles are ones that can be overcome. One is knowledge, and to change that, you need to have the dissemination of research, which is what you and I are doing right now. We're saying, here's research. How can we get it into the public domain? How can we educate people? And look, people who work in national governments, people who work in space companies are really busy people. They're not looking for a new problem on their desk. We're going to put this problem there. We're going to keep it there. We're going to insist that consideration be given to this, and that people understand it's part of the larger space debris crisis. We've also identified that the risk is higher to people in the global south, especially to people who live around 20 to 30 degrees north, because a lot of the bodies that are coming back in the next decade or two are coming back from geosynchronous orbit or geotransfer orbit, and therefore are more likely to fall on the mega cities of the global south, on the Jakartas, on the Mexico cities. They're not going to fall on Moscow or Washington, D.C. So there's a global equity issue here as well. We'd like to activate the global south to say that this needs to be part of international negotiations. But apart from that, it's simply a question of telling industry that this is going to apply around the world, that everyone is going to face the same transition costs of applying new technologies, of modifying their mission designs, that this might increase the cost of space launches by a couple of %, and that everyone is going to have to pay that. What we don't want to have is a situation where one country is showing leadership, requiring this to happen, and companies are choosing to launch elsewhere to avoid the extra cost. We want to have a level playing field. That's why you ideally need multilateral negotiations. That's why you need to have the major spacefaring nations come to the table and say that they're going to deal with this collectively. But that still doesn't stop a country like the United States by being the first mover and saying, we're going to do it first ourselves.
Sure. Did any of the agencies, any of the countries signaled to lead it? You mentioned it before, Aidan Little for the Assad ban. We had the chance to interview him in Geneva 1.5 years back, and he was very vocal, and it was before it entered the General Assembly. And then 1 year later, it's now it's out as a resolution. So, do you have another champion at the moment? And forgive me if you don't have so, but just want to see where we are with that.
Yeah, the one country that I will give a shout out to here is the Philippines, and the Philippines have a problem that's a little bit different. Obviously, they're subject to the same risk of uncontrolled reentries from orbit, but they're also receiving a lot of debris from suborbital trajectories of rocket bodies coming out of China. And so the Philippines has been quite vocal that this is not just an issue of objects that achieve orbit. It's also an issue with regards to, for instance, the solid boosters on the sides of rockets that don't make it to orbit, but do come back in a somewhat controlled way. But for instance, land in the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines, and therefore pose a hazard to fishermen and possibly also to the environment. So there are countries that are concerned about this, and more countries will become concerned. I am absolutely convinced. And again, I raised the small risk, but the real risk to commercial aviation. The International Civil Aviation Organization is aware of this issue and is showing a concern. So I think we'll see a wave of concern. And with regards to all those who doubt that this is an issue that's worthy of our attention, I would again emphasize that it probably isn't that serious an issue right now. But will it be a serious issue in 50 or 100 years when we have thousands and thousands of launches each year? If we don't change our practices, oh yes, it will be a big issue in the future. So let's be responsible. Let's deal with the problem so that succeeding generations of space actors and space enthusiasts don't need to wrestle with this when it's more difficult to solve.
I see. Before we come to our questions from our audience, how can we, the listeners here, our audience, can support it by signing? I think it's easy, and then go to your congressman and knock on his or her door and say, there's something you have to be taken care of.
Well, the first thing is, yes, go to the website of the Outer Space Institute. And there's a facility right there on the homepage that enables you to sign the International Open Letter, to join the hundreds of people who've already done so, and some very, very distinguished names on that list. For instance, Jan Werner, the former Director General of the European Space Agency, is one of the signatories. So sign the letter and then share it with your colleagues, with your friends who have an interest in space. This could be an exercise for anyone who teaches about space at university to say, hey, look at this International Open Letter. As a class, we should discuss this. And then, you know, any of you students, maybe there's 50 students in the class, may wish to sign it. Let's create additional momentum here. And then let's talk about it. Let's talk about it at international discussions like this. Let's talk about it in the halls of diplomacy. Let's raise it when we have the opportunity to talk with space agencies and with regulatory agencies. Let's make it part of the global conversation. That's the purpose of the International Open Letter, is to identify this issue as something that people should know about and should care about. And part of the reason for doing that is because this is a problem that we can solve, and we have enough problems that are really difficult to solve that we should seize on the ones that are possible. And this one is possible. We can do this as a species.
We have one question in here. It's more a comment from AC. Without an enforcement mechanism, many current space-capable nations would simply ignore the risk of re-entry incident, and if it occurs, then refuse any financial compensation responsible, such as Russia, North Korea, China, and soon Iran.
Let me just say that that's a very pessimistic view of the world. I'm not expecting that North Korea or Iran would join on to any such initiative under their current regimes, but that's not a reason for doing nothing, right? We have enough responsible countries in the world, including spacefaring countries, that we can make a very good start on this, and that's why we have diplomacy and lawmaking with regards to space. There are literally tens of thousands of people who devote their careers to making this happen, including among more than 150 governments. So the North Korea-Iran excuse is a weak excuse, with all respect. Let's just start on this business now.
Okay. I mean, I'm quite sure that the question is a huge question of Gunjan already was answered. One part maybe you might allude to is who will monitor and manage such policies if that's out. But I think there are a few steps in between.
One of the really great things about low Earth orbit and a geotransfer orbit is that we have excellent knowledge as to what is happening there, and our knowledge is improving all of the time because space situational awareness is improving all of the time. And these objects are big, right? I mean, we know where the rocket stages are. And if someone is abandoning a rocket stage in orbit, we know where it's come from. We know that it's been abandoned. We know what the decay time is likely to be. So this is not a knowledge problem. And in terms of enforcement, well, part of it is, do you have access to responsible countries for licensing, for insurance? If the United States were to be a first mover here, and everyone who wanted to use the United States in association with space launches had to comply, then yeah, maybe they would think about moving, but think of the benefits of being connected to the United States and its regulatory regime. That's why new space is centered in the United States. So there's a huge opportunity for the FAA to show leadership here. And in terms of enforcement, most space companies are responsible. They want to be well regarded. They want to be well regulated. They want to be able to get insurance. They want to exist within a rule of law system. They don't want a Wild West. Yeah, there are a few space actors who would like a Wild West, but the majority of them, despite what they might say when they're on Twitter, actually like the system of having regulation, having government authority. So no, I'm not concerned about transparency or enforcement, not at all.
Can it be also part of the space sustainability rating or other initiatives, because they're looking in a holistic approach on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, the issue of uncontrolled reentry should be part of every discussion that we have with regards to space sustainability. It already is to some degree, it just hasn't been highlighted until now.
Great. So I'm happy that Chris Johnson also jumped in here and said very clear here that damage on the ground from space objects triggers absolute liability under the Outer Space Treaty and Liability Convention. The liability incurred is one of financial compensations. Claims can be presented through diplomatic channels, and significant policy and public relations consequences would also occur. Thank you very much, Chris, for that. So, thank you, Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Is there anything, Michael, you would like to emphasize, something we forgot here? I mean, we will trigger again this letter and bring it up on other channels, on Space Café Radio or on other occasions to promote it. So what's next on your end then?
Well, at some point in the next few months or the next couple of years, we will have another global media story about another large rocket body being abandoned in low Earth orbit. It could be a Long March 5B, for instance. And we would like people to seize on that global media activity to inject into the debate the fact that this is a solvable problem. And there are, other countries, not just China, that could improve their behavior in this regard. This is not a China problem. This is a global problem. So there will be new opportunities to raise this issue, to talk about this issue, to insist that change occur. So that's my big point here, is that this will be a reoccurring story until we solve the problem. And if we have a major accident, our children and grandchildren will look back and say, "Why did you let this happen? You had the solution. You just were lazy." That's not the legacy that our generation of space activists should leave to the world.
That's right. Thank you very much for your time. And whenever there's a media story to tell, we are happy to share it on all channels. And with that, back to Eleanor. Are you with us? Elena?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Torsten. Thank you, Michael.
We made you speechless.
Yes, it was quite interesting. I was deep into the flow. Before we say goodbye, let me remind you of the upcoming events. On the 17th of January, at 4 p.m., we'll see you again for another episode of Space Café 33 Minutes with, and Torsten will be there on the 26th of January at 7 a.m. in Europe, so quite soon in Europe. And then we are going to cover a bunch of other time zones. So for example, until 5 p.m. In Australia, we're going to have our Space Café Low Breakfast with Stephen Freeland and Deepika J and Skip Smith, sorry. And on the 26th of January, later that same day at 8 p.m. Central European Time, we're gonna join the Space Bar, the 60th Space Bar by Astro Agency. On the 31st of January at 4 p.m. another episode of Space Café 33 Minutes with. And on the 1st of February, join us at 4 p.m. for our Space Café Black Ops by Dr. Emma Gatti for the second episode of the series with Namrata Goswami. And on the day after that, on the 2nd of February at 6 p.m., join us again with Emma for our Space Café Italy by Dr. Emma Gatti. As usual, all events are going to be online on Eventbrite, and we would love to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to sign up for our daily and our bi-weekly newsletters. And if you'd like to treat yourselves to something special, become a Space Watcher today or help us in the supporter program. Thank you, Michael, for the insightful talk. Thanks for being our guest. And thanks again to the entire team behind the scenes for doing this great job week by week again. As you've seen, Torsten shows our mug, our merchandising that is great and looks awesome. Our model, Space Watcher. I hope you will all stay safe and healthy. Thank you for our audience, to you for joining us. I hope to see you in the next weeks in upcoming events. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Bye.